past as they happened. Historians are not supposed to speculate, but I've indulged here and there in a few odd speculations. And I'm just going to leave you three. If his father had been alive in 1888, Gandhi would never have gone to London. If his brother had not been involved in a palace break-in, Gandhi may have never left Kathiawar for South Africa. And finally, if either in 1892 or again in 1902, Gandhi had succeeded as a lawyer in Mumbai, he would never have matured as a social reformer and political activist. Which is why, in the course of writing this book, whenever I pass the great Gothic building in South Mumbai, which carries the name of the Mumbai High Court, I offer a silent prayer. For if Gandhi had succeeded on either of his two attempts at the Bombay bar, you and I would not be here today. Thank you very much. I think we have a time for a few questions. I'd be happy to, reach out to you. Yeah, young man. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Right here. You want to stand up? Yeah, go ahead. You don't wait for it. You want to wait for a mic? Just stand. Yeah.
First of all, it was very refreshing to know that there's a book which deals with Gandhi and not just the usual high points we're all aware of from the textbooks and other books. So that there's also a thing that Gandhi is a highly idealized figure, the most idealized figure in our history, and some would say he's a holy cow, to use that rather. But then you and many other historians in recent times have started presenting a more critical view of him. So do you feel that now after over 60 years, nearly 70 years after his death, we've reached a point, this country has reached a point where we can have an objective, a much more objective view of Gandhi, and where we're willing to look at his greatness, but also at his flaws equally without controversy?
Sure, absolutely. I think what I've tried to do in this book is to present a fuller and richer account of Gandhi that I believe has been previously available. I wouldn't have written this book had I not believed he was a considerable figure. I mean, I argue in this book that he's the most influential human being of the 20th century. And he still attracts great admiration and great derision because of his influence and importance. I think we've always been open to criticizing Gandhi. In many ways, Gandhi is the one person any Indian can criticize because he belongs to no one and everyone. We are much more touchy about more figures like Ambedkar, Savarkar, Subhash Bose, Chhatrapati Shivaji. But you're right, in terms of the deification by the popular propaganda, we need a more subtle, nuanced understanding. But mine is not an iconoclastic book. It's I hope, a richly textured and nuanced account based on lots of new material on the making and shaping of this complex and extraordinary figure. So it's not an exercise in debunking, it's an exercise in fleshing out a richer picture of this man. Yeah. But I agree, but if I would say we have, and then later back,
Good afternoon, Mr. Guha. My question is, P. Sainath once said that Gandhi was the greatest journalist the country's had. So firstly, do you agree with him? And secondly, do you think the bar of the public discourse has lowered today because our politicians don't write and read as much as probably the politicians of those days did?
Well, I would say don't write, don't read would be more important. I don't think, people like Gandhi, Ambedkar, Nehru, Rajagopalachari, Savarkar. Now, all of them were great writers. They were all great journalists. I mean, I don't want to call Gandhi the greatest journalist. Just as I don't think Sachin Tendulkar is the greatest batsman. His greatest business I don't believe in. He was a remarkable journalist, as were Ambedkar and Nehru, who edited a newspaper, Rajaji and so on. Right? Now, that happened at a particular period of time. You're thinker activists. But at least you must have journalists or politicians who reflect and read. That's what we need. And you can see the nuances and complexities of an issue through study. I don't think we need writer politicians as reading and thinking politicians. There was a lady in the back there.
Hello, Ram. Was Mahatma sensitive enough to sufferings of black community during his stay in South Africa?
No, thank you. I deal with that at great length in my book. He went to South Africa as a person with the conventional prejudices of his time. Europeans are civilized. Indians who are civilized will soon again be civilized. The Kafirs are raw and indolent and backward. Over a period of time, he evolved. He became more sensitive to their sufferings, wrote about them in the newspaper. But he remained a community leader. He said that the Africans also will have to adopt non-violence to secure their rights. But I will organize my people, they will organize their people. And the African National Congress is partly inspired by him. After he comes back, which I talk about in volume 2, his horizon expands further. And he actually tells his followers in South Africa, make common cause with the Africans. So hence Kachalia's sons work with Mandela and so on and so forth. So as part of Gandhi's greatness is that he changed his mind, sometimes too slowly for you and me. You know, from the vantage point of 2013, we can say Gandhi didn't care enough for Africans. But from the vantage point of 1893, in a climate soaked with prejudice, Gandhi was opening his mind. But it remains, as I show in my book, the signal failure of his South African life. Not that he didn't lead the Africans in a struggle, that would be observed and anachronistic. That he had African acquaintances, but not a single African friend. He had Jewish friends, Christian friends, Tamil friends, Gujarati friends, colored friends, Malay friends, Chinese friends. I have a long section on the Chinese joining the Satyagraha, but that remains a failure. Yeah. You have. Yeah.
As opposed to India as per Gandhiji's vision or dream. I mean, it would be a very lengthy comment, I know, but if you could just...
Well, you know, I don't really want to go into it here. You know, I think it's not fair. It's not fair on Gandhi. It's not fair on me to think I can read Gandhi's mind. I think there's, but I owe you an answer. I think he would be modestly pleased with a vigorous defense and sustenance of linguistic pluralism. A record of Hindu-Muslim harmony would give him pause for concern on Dalit and gender rights, but you know, it's not fair. I think that's not fair to him. I mean, and the great thing about Gandhi is he's a universal figure. He doesn't belong to India. You know, one of my friends says, one of my friends was a great Gandhian scholar, I should not take his name since he's in public life, he says, even if we betray Gandhi, he'll be picked up somewhere else. We kicked out the Buddha, other people owned him. Yeah.
Hi, I just kind of want to ask you, what's the focus of the second volume going to be on? Because there's so much literature about Gandhi and his independent struggle, and during the course of your research, what kind of opinions have you formed which probably you did not have an insight to before, comparing to his own work?
Well, I'll give you a historian's answer. Volume 2, although the main contours of the story at least are vaguely known, I have done huge amounts of new research which no one has seen. So it's, again, based well beyond the collected works. I'll give you a few examples. For example, in the Maharashtra State Archives in Elphinstone College, there are detailed accounts of Gandhi's jail terms, which tells you about his life with his wife, his children, what he was eating, who was seeing, what happened to Kasturba as sick, you know, kinds of things you won't get anywhere else. The diaries of Gandhi's second secretary, Pyare Lal, have just been released. There's the archives in Delhi. There are the papers of all kinds of interesting people. The British colonial records are extensive. For example, of the Salt March. There are hundreds of examples. I'll just give you 3 or 4. Of the Salt March, I have seen the letters, which are in a British archive, between Lord Irwin the Viceroy and his mentor, the Archbishop of Canterbury. So when he's puzzled as to how to deal with this naked fakir, he's writing to his guru, "Main kya karu? Should I arrest him? Should I not arrest him?" You know, so what I tried to do in volume 2 is just by doing extensive research in many archives around the world to present a portrait of Gandhi from very, very different angles. So whenever there's a Gandhi fast, look at the local newspapers, even if they're Hindi and Gujarati and what they're telling you. So I hope you'll get, I won't give you my conclusions because I haven't arrived with that yet. I haven't, yeah, but I hope you'll get a much more nuanced account of even those years and some of the forgotten characters. I'll just give you one last point. Just as Pranjivan Mehta is the most considerable figure in Gandhi's life, who's hardly known about, right? Incidentally, the fine historian S.R. Mehrotra, who is now in his 80s, but superbly active, is about to publish next year a standalone biography of Pranjivan Mehta. Please read it. All right. So, just as Pranjivan Mehta is the fundamental forgotten figure of Gandhi's early life, the fundamental forgotten figure of Gandhi's Indian life is his secretary Mahadev Desai. Mahadev Desai was more important to Gandhi than Nehru or Patel. And I shouldn't be saying this, but I hope Narendra Modi knows something about Mahadev Desai. He talks a lot about Nehru and Patel. But anyway, he was someone who understood Gandhi perfectly. He knew the languages, English, Gujarati, Hindi. He was much better read than Gandhi. If there was a complex event, like a world war, Mahadev would study it before Gandhi. Gandhi trusted him and much more than Nehru or Patel. But he was an extraordinary figure who wrote himself out of the Gandhi narrative, because that was the kind of man Mahadev was. So there will be all kinds of interesting characters like this also, whom you'll see in volume 2. Apart from, I hope, fresh light even on the Salt March and well-known events. Yeah.
Mr. Guha, I think we'll be able to just take one last question quickly.
Sure. Yeah. Who's going to ask the last question? Whoever has control of the mic. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I thought, I got the impression that Gandhi would have wanted India to be an agrarian nation, and with a nation with, people living in the villages. And on the other hand, Nehru wanted India to have an aerospace program. So I see this Nehru-Gandhi divergence, and I'm wondering if we are caught up in the middle and we don't know which way to go regarding policies.
I don't want to speculate on what would have happened. But I'll talk a little bit about the intellectual climate in my second volume of the 30s. You see, Gandhi was in a comprehensive minority. The entire Indian intelligentsia in the 30s and 40s, not just Nehru. Nehru was merely a symbol and a mouthpiece. The entire Indian intelligentsia, with very few exceptions, wanted to industrialize and modernize. And there was a very interesting debate in the 30s and 40s on this. The Congress constituted a national planning committee when Subhash Bose was president, with Nehru as chairman of the committee, which deliberated on what would happen when India would become independent. And Gandhi's representative on that committee was a fascinating Tamil economist called J.C. Kumarappa, who was an early environmentalist who later influenced E.F. Schumacher and so on, and who kind of advocated a decentralized, eco-friendly model of rural development. So I'll talk about some of that in the 30s and 40s, in my second volume. But again, I'm a historian. At least, in an audience like this, I can talk off the cuff. But what I'm really trying to reconstruct in as interesting and as accessible a way possible, the many aspects of the life and labors and struggles of this remarkable man in his lifetime. So, I'm not going to tell you what Gandhi, I can't tell you. I'm not qualified to tell you how Gandhi could have helped us live a, more meaningful or more prosperous life. Yeah. One last question, yeah. Yeah.
I'm very interested to know about his attitude to the Holocaust. Did you find more information?
Yeah. No, there'll be lots in volume 2. But again, it's fascinating. I'm very glad I've spent many years and done it in 2 volumes. Because the Pollacks, I talked about, I'll just say a little bit. There's lots and lots of it. These are all fascinating things. I talked about Henry Pollack, who's Gandhi's second in command in South Africa. Now, a fascinating detail is that in the 30s and 40s, they drift apart. Because Gandhi is launching the Quit India movement about the time the Holocaust is happening. And there's a very interesting debate, which is known, where Gandhi advocates non-violent resistance to Hitler, and the great Jewish theologian Martin Buber responds, has an anguished rebuttal to Gandhi. So, a lot of this will come out, because the thing about the next volume is that, this is the personal, intimate Gandhi being shaped. When you talk of his life in the 20s and 30s, it's against the context of the Depression, the Holocaust, the World War, partition. So all these issues would come in. And he does say, Gandhi essentially advocates non-violent resistance, which may have worked against the British, but the question mark is, would it have worked against Hitler? And of course, Mandela is very important here, because the ANC from 1912, where it's formed on Gandhian principles, till 1962 is a Gandhian organization. All their presidents, like Albert Luthuli, ZX Matthew, and so on, admire Gandhi and practice non-violence. But after the Sharpeville massacre, Mandela and his younger friends say, non-violence won't bring down this racist regime, so we must resort to armed struggle. So many of these debates, which are often current and contemporary, and of course vary widely across societies. Non-violence may be practical and feasible here, not practical and feasible somewhere else. And then all this, there's some of this in this book, and I'll have to develop it as we go along. But the Holocaust will certainly figure, because Gandhi has some interesting, unorthodox, and controversial things to say about it.
Mr. Guha, thank you for this extremely interesting discussion and a talk with our audience. Mr. Guha will be available outside for book signings. A very important announcement before you leave the hall. The session on Sixers and Fixers with Bisham Singh Bedi and Boria Majumdar will be in the Lodha Hall and not the Lawns. It will be in the Lodha Hall. Thank you for being a great audience. We also thank our sponsors for making this happen. In just a few minutes, we come back with a session on the writer, the fanatic. Thank you. See you then.